Sam Davis, welcome to the craft.
Thank you guys.
You
Thank you for having me.
you are honoring us because you're the first guest that has an Oscar. So thank you
Ah,
for being here with us.
mm, glad to be here, you guys. Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
really,
Also, the
really, really
first guest
incredible.
that's multi hyphenate.
Ah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, happy to join you guys. This is fun.
cool. So tell us a little bit about you. How did you start in this business?
I started in the film industry in kind of a roundabout way, I guess. I wasn't. I'm not from a. I'm from a small town in Michigan. Very kind of quintessential Midwest upbringing. I wasn't necessarily steeped in art or film from a young age. I didn't grow up with, I didn't see the Godfather until I was 22 years old at USC Film School eventually. So, um, yeah, I listened to a little bit of Oren's episode. I love Oren, and I heard him talking about how he was, I think kind of the opposite. He was like really interested, really steeped in the arts from the beginning. For me, um, I think it came more from just like a born love for art. Like I grew up drawing. I don't know where that came from. I'm not from a family of artists. And eventually got my hands on a stills camera, and from there, a video camera, and all of a sudden I was just kind of this oddball kid in a town that, very sort of blue collar, middle of America town in Michigan. Um, Started kind of dreaming of making movies. And I started from a pretty young age making local TV commercials and, just dumb little movies with my friends in the woods. And we would dress up as soldiers and make little war films. And um, yeah, just early on, I think it also, a lot of it has to do with the way I was raised and my parents and just this. Um, they were kind of the exception, I think, for people from where I'm from, in that they really supported all my brother and sister and I all to um, chase our wildest dreams, even though that wasn't really a thing where I grew up. And so um, I kind of began down this road from a pretty young age of wanting to become a filmmaker. And shortly after high school, I moved to LA and started to kind of work here and build a portfolio, and I went to USC Film School. I was there for 2 years and entered into the film industry officially after that.
Nice.
Nice. So, what was the first? Was documentary the first love, or was it like traditional
Not at
narrative
all.
work?
Yeah, not at all, actually. I never really thought about making documentaries. Even when I was in film school, I was really focused on narrative filmmaking. Um, I never gave too much thought to documentary, and the first project that really the first thing I did after I graduated from film school was a short documentary called Period End of Sentence, and that film went on to win an Academy Award, and that the um, there were a lot of great things that came from that, of course, but they were all geared toward documentary, and that sort of pivoted my career a little bit toward nonfiction. For a long time, I was like a little reluctant. I was like, I want to make narratives. I want to make fiction. That's what I've always seen myself doing. That's how I geared my education at USC. Um, and I kind of like fell in love with documentary accidentally, just through the success of that film leading to more opportunities in documentary, and actually, over time, really came to understand the mutual benefit of the two sort of skill sets. My documentary work really influences my narrative work, and vice versa. I shot a feature film called Dee Dee last a year and a half ago now, almost 2 years ago, I guess, and you know, brought a lot of documentary skills to that film, even though it was a fully scripted. piece of fiction. So um, yeah, no, documentary was not the plan, but I always want to do both at this point. I've never, I don't look at it as like I'm using documentary to get to narrative or something like that. I think I'll always, until I die, I will make both narratives and documentaries.
One of the things that it's at least for me more interesting from your work is that
Hmm.
Didi, it's a beautifully cinematic movie, but it has that documentary soul in it, on the lighting, I mean.
Hmm.
But then you watch your documentaries, and they have a very deep film look.
Right.
They're very cinematic.
Hmm.
It's it's that a place where you landed, or it's something
Yeah.
that you have worked hard on to being.
I think it's really natural actually for me to make documentaries that feel like movies, like narrative and narratives that feel a little bit documentary. Just I think from my background in documentary and that skill set that I've built, how to work quickly, how to work with very little, um, and not just as a necessity, but um, as something to aspire to, like a certain naturalism that doesn't feel overlit or um, overly thought out. Um, and I think I'll always shoot narratives that feel a little bit documentary in some way because I can bring that sort of skill set to it. With Didi, we had just come off of Sean and I made a short film in his hometown, literally in his house, his parents' house, and the house that he grew up in, called 99 Waipo, and that was in a way that, along with another short that no one ever saw, no one ever will, hopefully, that we made during film school, which was a narrative. It was called Warm Springs, and it was set in like a Fremont suburb, which is where Dee Dee was ultimately set in Sean's hometown. And those projects, in addition to just like our friendship in general, and like this mega text thread we have of like just sharing copious amounts of references and images and anything that remotely inspires us, um, all sort of like came together to form the idea of the look of Dee Dee. And so we didn't know it at the time, but we were sort of unconsciously uh, cultivating that feeling. And I think like the film ultimately felt kind of documentary because it emerged out of some of our nonfiction work. And like these 99 Waipo almost served as like a light study or a tone study, even though Dee Dee is very different in a lot of ways from 99 Waipo. It was an opportunity for us to just be together with a camera around his family in the home that he grew up in and the town that he grew up in and the town that sort of where all the stories that make up the script of Dee Dee came from, and it was this really sort of organic, um, almost accidental development process for creating the look of that film.
When you look back on it now, were there some kind of hard and fast rules that you guys set out to in order to get to where you got?
For Dee
Yeah.
Dee,
Like where you're like, hey, we're only lighting through windows or we're only using certain focal length ranges or anything that you can like think that, hey, this became
yeah,
a
nothing quite, um, nothing quite that dogmatic, but we had general philosophies. We had lots of references. We spent like 6 weeks of formal like prep on location with our keys, in Fremont, where we were really every day just spending time poring over reference images and discussing and scouting. And then, as I mentioned, years before that, of casually talking about what we wanted the movie to feel like. And um, we created some philosophies like a really pretty comprehensive Bible, of imagery. There were GIFs so that we could illustrate camera movement. It wasn't just stills that we had pulled from sites like ShotDeck. and we created philosophies like, and it was written in text. So this document was a mix of sort of written out text and imagery, and it would be things like, um, I remember one page was about achieving a feeling that felt elegantly hodgepodge is what we wrote, because we wanted to find a way to combine things like, really crude, visually crude visuals that come from YouTube videos from, the dawn of YouTube, or AOL Instant Messenger scenes, and be able to cut from that to something that feels pretty, almost reverent, like a moment of his grandma after she takes a fall, and something very soulful, and see, and what is that? And I think we were starting to get at that idea with Nine Nine Waipo, because that film is like, on one hand, it's dealing with end of life and mortality, and also like there's this shade of um, this socio-political situation around elderly Asian people being the victims of, hate crimes around COVID. And so there are some really serious, heavy themes there, and then we can just cut to them talking about farts or like arm wrestling, and then right back to talking about how they feel lonely because all of their friends back in Taiwan have died. They've outlived all of them. And then, we cut to them drinking whiskey. And so there was this, I think that idea was sort of born out of Nine Nine Waipo, and we wanted to be able um, to hold on to that in some capacity with Didi. So we talked about it being elegantly hodgepodge. We talked about like and differentiating between the interiors inside the home and inside Wang Wang's home specifically, and then everything else outside the home feeling sort of limitless and untethered, and inside the home, our rule was that the camera weighed 1,000 pounds. It was like some primitive, we imagined that the camera was some primitive system that um, we couldn't move, because being a kid trapped in your own home with your annoying sister and your parent and your stifling parents is sort of torturous, and like there's nothing, a young boy wants other than to sort of like break out and escape that. And so we wanted to kind of create a little bit of a dichotomy between those two feelings. I'm sure there were others. We weren't super rigid about it as we set out to make the movie, but I think the amount of time we spent poring over images and talking about philosophies and the visual storytelling in prep sort of seeped into the movie organically, because it was all baked into the backs of our minds. We never referenced any of those images once we set foot on set. We weren't like pulling them up and saying, what if we went for something like this? It was all very, it was osmosis by that point.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your choice of lenses
Mm.
because first of all, those are a set of lenses that I didn't like,
Yeah.
but after watching your movie, now I'm kind of, oh, so you can do that with those lenses too. But
They,
I'm curious about the choosing anamorphics to crop
mhm.
to 185. So
Yeah.
two questions: why, and the second, why choose that format? It's a format that is it because in the 2012s that was like a normal format,
Mhm.
or
No, not
does it
really.
have?
It has a lot more to do with just like my personal taste and the way anamorphic sort of rolls off, and what it does to faces. I think this is
Mm-hmm.
a movie about faces, and a lot, like
It is.
it was really a portrait movie, and sort of in a lot of ways kind of like a character study. And as we looked at the script, so many of the shots were going to be like mediums and two shots and singles, and so I was drawn to anamorphic for a couple of reasons. One, as I said, because I just love the way it resolves, on skin and faces, and I love the way it rolls off. But we knew that it was going to be really fast, the schedule. We had a cast full of first time actors, kid actors, nonetheless, and so their work schedules were already very limited. I think we had 5 or 7 hours a day with Isaac, the lead, who's in basically every shot. depending on the day of the week and his school schedule. And so that's a really limiting factor. And we were going to have we knew we were going to be really tight on time in terms of like shaping the look. And so I thought that shooting anamorphic would lend the film a certain specificity that would be automatic in just the photography, and sort of caramelize the look of the film in a specific way, and without adding time. And so we decided to do that and crop, because we weren't shooting anamorphic for the scope, for the wide aspect ratio. It was purely for the characteristics of the lens, and there being a little something, interesting or special about the optics. And we cropped, and actually, when you crop, of course, you're accentuating that even more, the roll off, and the way the lens resolves. And so yeah, it was really more just a stylistic decision. It didn't have anything to do with the time period, other than maybe, maybe it felt the hair more nostalgic than spherical in some way. Um, and then we decided to go with master anamorphics after testing, because everything else, especially once cropped, felt really funky. Um, and the master anamorphics were fast and sharp until you crop into them, and then they start to, even those start, you really feel the character in them. And so yeah, we settled on master anamorphics after testing a bunch of different lenses, both spherical and anamorphic. I think the other factor was that we originally conceived the film in 16 mil, so we were going to shoot celluloid, and just budget and time and a bunch of other constraints ultimately led us to opting with digital, but we didn't want it to be too clean. And I thought that, giving it a little distortion optically could sort of dirty it up just enough. I think ultimately the film is a lot cleaner than what I imagined it would be. And it may be a blessing in disguise, actually, because I really do believe that it sort of opened the film up to a broader, maybe more commercial audience than had we shot it like mid 90s or something like that. Really sort of arty. And yeah, I mean, I'm personally blown away at the reach that the movie has had, and the sort of like commercial success it's had. It was a true indie film that we scrapped together, and yeah, it's been everywhere. And to see it, on the plane when I go for a shoot, or to see people still talking about it, or to have seen it play in theaters. I think there's a certain commerciality about the look that is still soulful enough and still has a little bit of grit, but it doesn't alienate its audience in any way.
Yeah, it kind of it has just enough of a grid, but
Yeah.
it kind of counterbalances really well how heavy the story is sometimes. No, if you're not adding up to that heaviness.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
particularly love that.
Well, and the
I'm glad you liked
cleanliness of like the main story really contrasts all that, found footage, skate video, YouTube stuff. I think if it were made dirtier, maybe it wouldn't be such a contrast.
That's probably true.
But
Yeah.
did you end up shooting those like wide open to get as much out of the Masters super cleans, or did you shoot them in a certain?
I think we mostly shot them wide open, or, a bump under.
Look, we were just talking about that before you came on. The
Yeah.
thoughtfulness of both the framing and the lighting, where it's like, even though you're working quick, like as you said, it's every setup and every close up of a face has like a really nice like shape and negative, and it's beautiful work, man.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think we had a really good team, and from our department to camera and Grip and Electric, and for being a small movie, I'm really proud of the look we created. And it's not a visually flashy film by any means. It wasn't, it was my first narrative feature, and so I learned a ton on this movie, and but every day it was like, what is my how can I best serve this movie, not just visually, but like the whole production. What can we realistically achieve in the time that we have? And I don't know. I think it's easy to. I'm really ambitious. Our whole team was really ambitious, but like sometimes ambition can sort of betray you. You have to know I would rather compromise and execute something at a really high level that upholds a certain standard throughout the movie than grossly overreach and have something feel cheap or distracting. And so, it was a lot of balancing priorities and not just for cinematography, but just the production in general. And but I'm proud of the look that we came away with.
Well, that's kind of a constant in your work. I mean, this you haven't shot a cheap images ever, at least of what I've seen.
Thank
So
you.
that has that something to do with you being most of the time the editor, the producer,
Mhm.
the DP, and sometimes the director or the co-director? Is that
Yeah.
global mindset what helps you be in that position when you're shooting for somebody else?
I think that those skills definitely are an asset to my work as a cinematographer. In particular, um, editing, and understanding of like the way shots are going to cut together. I think every DP should be an editor in a way. And really every editor of course doesn't need to have the skills that we have as cinematographers in terms of like how to use a light meter and and ratios and what crane does what. Of course they don't need to know that, but they should have equal to or better than um, understanding of visual storytelling and taste. Otherwise, the work declines rather than improves over the course of
Yeah.
the filmmaking pipeline. And I think that sometimes that's the case. Not on DD. We had a fantastic editing team on that film, and they really elevated the film. But um, yeah, and then of course, working as a producer, just generally having experience storytelling. I really think of myself as a filmmaker in my day to day because I do a lot of different things. I always want to shoot. I've never looked at cinematography as a pathway to directing. Some DPs have kind of taken that track. I always want to do both, kind of like doing narrative and documentary. It would be more efficient if I could just say I'm a DP and I'm going to shoot dramas, or I want to shoot Marvel movies. That's my goal. I think for young DPs listening to this, like the truth is it is efficient to be specific about what it is you want to do. For me, I've just always, from the time I was a kid, been a filmmaker more holistically. Like I've always wanted to tell my own stories. I've always had, maybe part of it has to do with USC Film School and the way they teach you to sort of become you have to learn a little bit of everything in school, and you have to kind of know how to produce your own work. And so yeah, it just depends on the project. And on one day I could be wearing one hat, and on another day I could be wearing another, or several. And yeah, you have to sort of like also stay in your lane. With Didi, like Sean and I are best friends, and so it's not an issue. But I'm still in a slightly different mode than I would be if I was directing something, of my own. there's a certain there's a certain lane that you have to stay in, and of course Sean and I can sidebar and we can talk about anything, and I can give him feedback, and he welcomes that. He's extremely collaborative, but not everyone is so much, and you just have to be kind of in tune with the project and with your role on the project as a sort of hyphenate filmmaker. But yeah, absolutely. I think like for in terms of like setting myself apart from other cinematographers, that's the biggest thing. Is just this like very sort of holistic track record of experience and other facets of filmmaking. And yeah, that's an asset that I can bring.
I love that. One of the other things of the thoughtfulness of Didi
Hmm.
that came to mind is it didn't feel over covered by any
Hmm.
means. Like everything felt like this shot was so specific and had to be
Yeah.
shot this way. Specifically, there were moments like when Nine falls outside and it's just like, hey, we're just shooting this from the kitchen, just
Yeah.
pushing and slowly. Did some of that come in conversation with your work as an editor? And you know, he's like, we don't need anything else,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, we're not specifically talking about my experience as an editor, but like with
Yeah, yeah.
Sean, he, of course knows, and we've worked together in so many different ways, um, that he knows he can trust my instincts on that. And Sean's an editor too, and I know I can trust his. And so, but yeah, I mean, interestingly, I think we thought more of the movie would be, I thought we would be even more sort of minimalist in the way we covered the movie and really shoot masters. And it's it sounds like it could be simpler actually to work like that, but actually it's really not, because you have to, when you're shooting sort of like single shot scenes, even if they're static, um, there's a you of course shoot yourself into a corner, and there's a huge amount of pressure on every pixel of that take being perfect, or else you can't use it. And so working with a bunch of kids who had never been on a movie set before, Sean and I both being our first feature, narrative feature, as director and DP, I it was just it was unrealistic that we would do that too often. We had to give ourselves options. I think we would strive in the future toward some simplification in the coverage, and because I think it can be really elegant for a certain story. Not for every story. Again, elegantly hodgepodge meant we could be cutting around like maniacs, and it could be sort of it could feel very intentional, and the effect of it could be very true to the chaos of adolescence, or AOL Instant Messenger or whatever. So, but yeah, I appreciate that. I like that there are some moments that are really refined and sort of simple in the way we covered them.
Why do you guys choose to shoot every screen so flat and completely inside the screen
Mm.
as almost force, as opposed to the easygoing and almost documentary kind of style for the rest of the
Hmm.
movie?
Good question. I a, well, a big part of it was that we didn't shoot that stuff. And so like if the
Okay.
script was
Okay.
if the script was, I think the script was 96 pages or something like that. 16 pages of it took place on a screen. That was huge for
Huge.
for our ability to pull this movie off. And yeah, in the amount of time and with the budget that we had. So the all that screen stuff is um composited and created after the fact. Not all of it, of course. I mean, the stuff where there are a handful of moments where you see him at his computer, and those are, of course, practical. But the
Yeah.
screen, whatever is on the screen, is probably not. But the full bleed screen storytelling was all honed in the edit, and it's one of my favorite parts about the movie. It's a part that I had little to nothing to do with, so it's funny in that regard. But I think that the comedic timing of and not just comedic, but just it's really clever and really careful the way that they the way that they stitched those, those moments together. And there's so much uh, specificity to the time period, and the way that they, even like little things that you aren't even meant to see on the screen. Um, yeah, just really appreciate the amount of thought that went into that, and I think it really elevates the film.
I mean, it felt like super thought, like super some big. Yeah, it's like two different worlds, completely different worlds, and they blend really well into the movie. So I thought it was
Yeah,
something that it was thought from the very beginning.
that was
That's
really cool
great.
to see for me too, because like, as a DP, this is different. Dee Dee was a lot different from a film like Nine Nine WIPO, where Sean and I collaborated day to day on the. I have a producer credit on Dee Dee, but it's an associate producer credit for some of the things that I organically lent the film. I wouldn't consider myself really a producer of Dee Dee. Uh, that was really Carlos and Val, and the producing team who put the movie together. So, when I wrapped D, I didn't really see much for like, at least. I mean, we turned the thing. They cut the movie in lightning speed. It premiered. We wrapped in September. We finished the movie in September, and found out we had gotten into Sundance in December. So it was a crazy, and it was still a
Wow.
work in progress at that point. And then it premiered like, mm, 4 or 5 months after we wrapped. So very, very fast. And but all that to say, when we finished, I didn't see anything for a long time. Um, Sean would send me little bits and pieces, and give weigh in here and there, but really, like, especially with regard to the screen storytelling, I didn't fully see the way that stuff came to life until it premiered at Sundance. So I graded the film, and you're combing through every shot and when I say I graded the film, I didn't personally, but during the grade, you're combing through shots one by one, uh, and so I had seen the screen storytelling stuff, but it really wasn't I didn't see it fully play out in sequence until the premiere at Sundance, and that was really cool, to see how it all threaded together.
Who's the colorist is Caitlin?
Yeah,
What's her name?
uh, her last name's Battistelli, I believe.
Yeah,
That's how you
Caitlin
pronounce her
Ballistelli.
name.
She's. I mean,
Yeah,
I think that she did an
Amazing.
amazing job in the movie. It's beautifully
she
graded.
she did such a
Yeah.
great job, and she brought so much care to it. I think, for me, like, finding a good, there's so many talented colorists out there, but when you're balling on a budget, and you gotta, you have an indie feature, which is a lot of work to color an indie feature, you know, weeks of work, um, and you have no money, it's kind of difficult. You can ask for a favor, but I'm always weary of asking for favors, because then you get the favor effort, you know, uh, a lot of times, not all the time. In Caitlin's case, she really invested in it, and I love that. There's no worse feeling as a DP than like pouring your heart and soul into something, and then getting into the grade and feeling like the shots are being run through some sort of, the
Oh,
colorist is like, oh, okay, okay, and
that's
you ask for
horrible.
some shaping or something, and they're like, oh, doesn't need it, it's a documentary, or whatever. I mean,
Mm.
no shade on colorists in general, but like, that's kind of a common thing that I've found coming up. And of course, it's going to be more common when you're making passion projects and you're pulling favors and stuff. But and Caitlin was so the opposite, and I'll continue to work with her, whenever I can, because of the care that she put into every frame.
Were there any specific things you did in the grade to kind of heighten that, aesthetic? Whether it's, hey, we need
Mm.
to make it feel a little more throwback, or we need to do something.
Yeah, I mean, I think going into the grade, we still were thinking maybe we would do like a heavy film emulation, and we ultimately didn't really. We kept it, there's a grain element, that we added, but we, it wasn't like we were adding gate weave inhalation and crazy diffusion or anything like that in the grade. So I think with Caitlin, it was more just like giving every image and every, looking at every scene and the way it transitioned into the next, a lot of thought and sort of doing endless revisions, not because I was asking for it, but because she wanted to really get it right. And the look, like a lot like the way we shot it, is pretty it's pretty understated and um, I think beautiful, but really no, there weren't really any big tricks, I don't think, that we employed.
Nice.
So you basically went to college with not a whole lot of movie education, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when you started watching movies and you started thinking, okay, I'm going to be a cinematographer,
Yeah.
were you already thinking in this kind of like cinematic but naturalistic approach, or just because you started shooting documentary, that's the approach that you that grow on you and the one you kept going?
Mm-hmm. Um, I'm not sure. Maybe it's just my sort of my natural taste to work somewhat naturalistically. I also shoot stuff that looks pretty traditionally cinematic and lit and so I don't do that exclusively necessarily, but I yeah, I think it probably comes and it, maybe not so much documentary, but at least from working on things that where there just weren't necessarily resources to achieve what I felt would be a an effective, elevated, stylistic, heavy stylistic look. Working on a lot of low budget things or student projects, and like I said before, preferring to achieve something that's pretty grounded, but at a really high level, and creating a lot of consistency and putting a lot of thought into the details of that, rather than something that feels extremely loud visually. So, but yeah, the naturally lit sort of docu style um, isn't it's certainly not a rule for me. I do enjoy lighting and kind of digging into a scene and um, I guess we all sort of have our niche that we either fall into or sort of like shepherd ourselves into, depending on our taste and like period end of sentence, the documentary that kind of kicked things off for me. What types of projects sort of give you your door in? Um, but yeah, I guess that is sort of my wheelhouse, and it probably came from, at least in part, from shooting docs.
In a lot of your doc work, I've noted, I mean, gorgeous, same thing, like thoughtful
Yeah.
frames. I'm sure you're working in like environments you can't fully control,
Mm,
but the images, a lot of them feel very film. I know everybody throws around filmic, but filmic,
hmm
and you're like, you
hmm
put it on a big screen, halation, grain, heavier
Yeah.
contrast ratios. Are you shooting some of these on film, or is
Yeah.
this like
I've
emulation? Okay.
yeah, I've definitely fallen into a little niche of shooting documentaries on film. I think the first one that really got some notice was a film called Long Line of Ladies. It was nominated for an Emmy for cinematography, News and Doc
Mm-hmm.
Emmy for cinematography, and which was really cool because we put a ton of we just put a ton of effort into the look of that film, and I about 4 almost 5 years ago started on a feature documentary that's all shot on film, and we're following the basically the entire adolescence of this basketball prodigy as he grows up. And as he grows up, the film negative format progresses from 16 when he was really young to it's like this almost um, cinematic home video kind of feeling. quality to 2 perf 35 when he enters high school, and then 3 perf when he's a junior, and 4 perf when he's a senior. So the film negative format kind of expands to accommodate him, and also the stakes of the project grow as time goes on. And so, yeah, I'm shooting docs constantly on film, and that's something that I've really grown to love because I think you can. I don't know. I think there's something really satisfying about telling a true story, a verite film, but capturing it in a way that feels still as crafted and elevated as most narrative films do. Um, you can't all, it's not for every project, certainly. There's like, if I was going to shoot like an investigative journalism type documentary, I probably wouldn't limit myself to 400-foot mags and um, a really heavy camera. But for other projects, Long Line of Ladies, the one that I mentioned that sort of kicked off this pattern of shooting docs on film, was like a really quiet, patient story about a Native American coming of age ceremony. And there was a lot of, from the very beginning, it was paramount that we took special care in the way we captured it, and so that we weren't um, exploitative in any way. And film sort of forced us to forever up until recently, I think docs were just about getting it in the can, like whatever, and you like suck it all up into the camera. That's your job as a documentarian, and I think only in the last 10 or so years we've really, and of course there are exceptions like Errol Morris's early stuff, Vernon, Florida, films like that, but until recently, I don't think we've put so much emphasis into the craft of documentary filmmaking. And around the time I graduated film school, and my career sort of pivoted toward documentary, there was a bit of a renaissance where we were seeing like beautifully shot documentaries and docs, that really use sound design and all the formal elements of narrative filmmaking to tell a story. And yeah, and so with Long Line of Ladies, it was in some ways I think about slowing down and being more intentional about what we capture and why we're shooting it and how we're shooting it and what we're saying. And I think of course there are pitfalls, like you're gonna roll out at the worst time. Shooting a verite doc on film, it's inevitable. You have to go into the project um, already having come to terms with that reality. But I think that the weight and the reverence that shooting celluloid lent the subject matter ultimately really elevated that film. And the same can be said for a lot of the other films that I've shot on celluloid, documentaries, and we'll continue to do that because and it's for different reasons. Not every project is because of the intentionality and reverence that it lends it, but yeah, there's a sweet spot there, I think, for me, where I'm like, I feel like I'm flexing all those muscles that we do as narrative cinematographers, but um, within the frame, something true and live is playing out. And talk about a good way to cut your teeth as far as like shooting narrative filmmaking, films on celluloid or digital, to work under that level of pressure and to work that quickly and but create images that are hopefully really memorable and really sort of powerful, in part because they're shot on film, is that's been great for me in my development.
I'm curious about one thing. We're kind of constantly separating documentary and film, documentary and
Hmm.
film. Uh, but at the end of the day, a documentary is a feature film too, because what you choose to keep in frame or not keep in frame, and what you choose to cut or not
Hmm.
cut, you're shaping the narrative.
Right.
So you're making a movie at the end of the day. Uh,
Yeah.
what's your take on that, and what's your approach? More as a director, I will say,
Hmm.
when you approach a documentary or a
Hmm.
movie, is it a different approach?
Yeah, sometimes there's a way to like get um yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. I think that I think even even when first of all, even when elevating a film, shooting on film, you can make something as truthful as any film can be. Of course, like so, by nature of having a camera and editing, and it's not entirely truthful. Even just like the presence of a camera in a room is gonna, you could say, will affect the way that someone exists on camera. So I guess at that point, um, truth is already sort of out the window. But as we get into crafting documentaries and really telling stories in a specific way, and whether it means sort of curating a specific conversation, a lot of times in verite docs, especially shooting on film when you can't just roll endlessly, it's about being smart about how to like do something that maybe isn't entirely organic in order to get to a really organic place. Like if you have a group of people sitting around a table and you want them to talk about, it would be great for the film if they addressed some issue. Um, what can I say to start a conversation amongst these people that I'm, as a camera person, not really a part of? Maybe I have to remind them of that. That's pretty common. I'm not here. We always say, I'm not here. We're not here. Um, and then can I just sit back and wait, if I'm shooting film in particular, can I just sit back and wait for it to turn into something meaningful for and truthful for the story? And often you can. Sometimes people are really sort of conscious of the camera and weird, and it feels very stifled or forced at first when you're directing something or when you're trying to get to an idea. But a little bit of time and patience and just kind of sitting back ready with your finger on the, on the record button, um, is all it really takes. And then just being in tune with your subjects and kind of understanding their personalities and what gets them thinking. Ask them to sort of meditate on one thing, and maybe whatever it was you were hoping they would talk about, they never do, but it leads to some completely different thing.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, when it comes to like journalistic integrity, my films are definitely on the more cinematic end. I try things, sometimes I'll shoot like a recreation, or I'll have a specific idea for a shot in mind that may not be true verite, but I think when you watch the film, it creates, and maybe the film doesn't claim even that it's true verite, but the whole experience of watching the film creates a feeling that is very truthful, almost like going through, using a tactic that, again, from the beginning, it's not an organic experience to be in a movie,
Mm.
to have a movie made about your real life, and so that's sort of out the window. But you then drill down into some truth, and then when you edit the movie, you find all those little bits and put it together, and hopefully there's something authentic there.
Is there a I'm just curious with like a
Mhm.
subject. Say you have this doc that you're going to do, and you've got a subject,
Mhm.
and is there an acclimation phase with like
Oh,
you, the
absolutely.
director, and the sub? Like, hey, let's just sit in a
Yeah.
room for like a couple weeks, and you get used to this camera that's not even on
Mhm.
right now.
Yeah,
You
it's
know?
huge. I mean, not even just for a director, but cinematographers too. Like anyone who's involved in the creation of a verite documentary, like the um yeah, any dot in my opinion, any documentary worth making is one where there's like some unprecedented level of access. That doesn't have to mean Navalny or something where you're like following a political thriller and you're close to the action and people are being poisoned, and it could just mean like you're you've established a degree of intimacy where someone can talk about something really traumatic that happened in the comfort of their own home, with a camera there. And so that doesn't happen overnight. And you really, so much of documentary filmmaking, I think, is a little bit like maybe maybe 50% filmmaking and 50% almost something like social work, or a lot of times sort of like socio-political activism, and you really have to spend the time to build trust both ways, you have they have to trust you, of course, but you also have to trust them because they're active participants in something that you're probably spending a lot of money on and want to do really well. And being a subject of a documentary, I think a lot of times you're a producer by default. You know, you probably don't even know what a film producer is, but like if I'm coming
Great point.
to, you know, if I'm coming to Cleveland to make a movie about this person, I hope that they're going to be able to like show me around, and I hope they're going to be able to tell me, you know, who can help me with certain things, whether it's like who has a pickup truck so we can transport our gear, a van, and so there's really a an involved amount of participation between documentary subject and crew and yeah, but just to get to that to get to that level of intimacy that makes any documentary worthwhile can take months, years. Sometimes, you know, I know filmmakers who have like shot a film or sort of like a test film just to sort of get to the point where they know their subjects well enough and their subjects know them and build some trust, and then they can go on to tell the real story that they wanted to tell. Um, it's a huge part of what we do in documentary.
Is there any particular approach for the lensing? Do you use zoom lenses? Do you
Hmm. In docs,
choose only one lens to shoot the in docs? Yeah.
yeah, in docs, I usually use a combination, zooms and primes, but Long Line of Ladies is interesting because a lot like Didi, actually, we knew we were going to be moving quickly. We were like, how can we create a specific look? Okay, we're going to shoot on film. Great, let's do it. But even then, like, how can we how can we elevate this? You know, how can we make it look different from a lot of like 16 millimeter music videos we're seeing come out or and we decided to shoot on the Hawk 1.3 times squeeze anamorphic primes, which are expensive and like we spent a big chunk of our budget on them. But again, like that sort of instant aesthetic of the widescreen anamorphic, those lenses are so beautiful and they're
They're
fast and
gorgeous.
they're tiny. You know, they're really
Gorgeous.
small. Yeah, they're fantastic. So if you can afford them, and like that between 16 and those lenses, it was like, man, we have such a strong specific look here. There's also something to be said for like, okay, this film is about a community. We're often going to be in groups of like 12 people sitting in the grass, you know, weaving baskets or whatever, you know, whatever the scene is, practicing a dance routine, just sitting around the kitchen table. And so that wide aspect ratio, in this case, we didn't crop it. There's not enough there to crop with 16, but we wouldn't have wanted to anyway because you know, it just that aspect ratio lent itself to the sort of like the anatomy of this world, and the scenes that we were capturing.
I'm,
How?
I'm
Um,
so,
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was really surprised watching that documentary on how open the girls were talking about their
mm,
first period, which is
mm,
normally something that's like nope.
mm,
And you guys get there, and they talk super naturally and even
mm.
happily about it. It's
Yeah.
great job.
Well, that's an even more extreme example. The film I was talking about previously was Long Line of Ladies, which was sort of like a spiritual uh, sequel to Period End of Sentence. And with Period, it was like we would wait. Yeah, I mean that it was always a challenge, and some girls never did open up, and even some of them I think are in the edit because we wanted to show just how sort of um, real the issue is and the fear of how taboo it is. And but yeah, we would spend, and that film was completely handheld. We didn't even have a tripod, and it was really, really bare bones in the approach for a number of reasons. But we shot our interviews handheld also, and so it'd be like 100+ degrees in a in the village and handheld shooting an interview, and we're just hoping. And I don't speak Hindi, and so I have to assume that every word that comes out of someone's mouth is the the line that's going to make
Perfect.
the movie. They could be, and of course, like, you know, 2 months later, we got all of the footage back and it was transcribed with subtitles, and there would be like an hour long side rant about like a girl's dog or how it got sick, and just like something completely irrelevant to the story, and I'm just like dying like handheld in the corner, and but I really had to stay on at all times with that film. And sometimes we would just wait and wait and wait and never get anywhere with the subject. Other times I don't know, I think with that film that some girls were curious to be invited to talk about that, and even if it was with foreigners and a camera. So it was a really interesting kind of exercise in kind of going into those communities and talking about something that was extremely taboo with a camera.
When you're gearing up for a doc project on film, part of it's, I mean, the prep and logistics. How do you even figure out how much film to bring along?
That's a good question. Well, I have sort of like I've done it enough now that I have some metrics.
Yeah.
Certain projects I know I'm going to shoot more per day. You can also look at the forecasted schedule, if there is one on a doc, and say like, okay, today's the wedding that we're filming, and we're starting at 8 a.m. when everyone starts to get ready, and we're going to wrap after at late at night. We're probably going to roll a lot of footage today, so you can kind of budget that way. But every project I have like averages, and you don't really know going into a project other at that point you just refer to past projects and try to compare. But yeah, on average on a feature, shooting 16, I roll like 10 400-foot rolls a day, so 4,000 feet or so. Could flex up by 5 rolls or down. So, and some, I've done a couple
carry
where
more than you need and just roll it over.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, usually you can use your film on the next shoot, and if not, sometimes you can sell it back, save money that way. If not, you put it in the fridge and find a use for it.
Is there any tool that you never go out without? Like, it doesn't matter if you do commercials or jump into documentaries, jump into features. Any tool that is like, okay, this comes always with me because it's always handy.
Good question. Well, I don't know about never go without, but recently it's a really sort of primitive tool, but I've always been requesting rolling spreaders because I when I'm shooting docs on film, especially because the cameras are quite heavy, and this film is about a basketball player, so we find ourselves in gyms a lot, and to be able to just quickly slide around and maneuver, it rolls, so you can almost shoot dolly shots on these things. I don't really do that. It's not what I request them for, but the economy of being able to just like roll around weightlessly is really nice. I'm trying to think of what else I use regularly. On film shoots, of course, I always have my light meter around my neck, and it's sort of a chaotic process of like shooting verite, and I'm like operating, and I have my meter here, and I'm like trying to look around the camera, and I always spot meter on docs because there's just not time to take an incident reading, and I'm always fine. I've never had an issue with that. I kind of know how to expose that way. Even on narratives, when I'm shooting film, I tend to spot meter mostly. I think because I've spent so much time on docs doing it. And yeah, nothing else is coming to mind, specific tools that I use. Sometimes when I shoot anamorphic, I use diopters sort of unnecessarily to accentuate the quirks of the lens. Even if I'm not necessarily within close focus, I'll put a light diopter on, a half or a 1, and that kind of changes the look of the lens in an interesting way if I want something more stylized, soft. Yeah.
Do you see yourself I know you say you shoot some more lit, expressive kind of content as well. Do you see yourself in the near future kind of sticking more naturalistic documentary, real life stories, or is there something you're just like, hey, you're like, God dang, I'd love to shoot like a
Yeah,
neon colored musical.
I'd love to shoot actually a horror film. Um, as a DP, I'd love to do a horror film. I really like, I think most DPs would agree, but just shooting in low light and moody, very visual settings. That I think I'm inspired to do something like that next as a DP on a narrative feature or a really visual drama or something like that would be cool. But generally, I'm always inspired to do stuff where like I really love, like I said before, the sort of space between narrative and documentary and figuring out how to overlap um, those flavors in an interesting way, synthesize those skill sets. And so, yeah, like we talked about before, just narratives that have sort of documentary qualities. And but again, I love, and I directed a short recently that where the performances and there was like no script and all of the cast was first time non-actors and or first time actors and but it was shot on 35 and like very sort of almost classical in the way it looks and um, yeah I'm very curious, sort of endlessly curious at how we can synthesize those traditionally you know very different philosophies.
I've seen the trailer. You're talking about singers,
The
right?
singers, yeah.
It
Hmm.
looks amazing.
Thank you. I'm really
It looks
excited
like
for it.
it looks so good. I mean,
Thank you. Appreciate
congratulations.
it.
I can't wait to see the whole thing because it looks
Yeah,
really, really pretty.
I'm excited to premiere. We're going to premiere the film at South by Southwest this March, and it's sort of it's a big experiment. It's a unlike anything I think I've seen before. Which, if I'm directing a short and a short a short especially, there's just so much out there and so much great stuff that like I'm like if I'm gonna do it, I want to make sure I'm doing something kind of weird and that's that's not been done before, at least not quite like this. And so yeah, we took a lot of risks with that one and tried to shoot on 35 and capture something that feels really specific stylistically and really elevated, but within the frame, like there's this sort of wildness with this documentary spontaneity. And um, the two things don't really go together because with film, generally you have to be pretty precise and like you have to be conservative. But I think the result is really unique and fun. And I'm pumped to play it for an audience.
Cool. There's you have a long-lasting creative relationship with Raika, and I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how to pronounce her
Yeah.
her surname. Um,
Zatabshi.
Satashi. Okay, Raika
Hmm.
Satashi. I'm sorry. Um, you guys, I think that you met at college, and
Hmm.
you started working together from the very beginning.
Yeah.
How did you? And basically, for as long as I can see on the credits, you
Hmm.
guys are like a two-person band. You do everything
Hmm.
from producing, researching, shooting, directing,
Yeah.
editing, and I don't know if you do the music, but that's the only thing that
No,
it's
I don't have a
left.
musical bone in my body.
How did you how did you decide what hat was wearing each of you? It was
Hmm.
something natural. Or it was something premeditated from the beginning.
Yeah, Reka and I met in film school, and I think Rika was more of a director from the beginning, and I was sort of more I kind of had one foot in the directing world, but was more of like crafts person, really interested in editing and cinematography. And so we sort of melded our minds in that way and formed a small production company and started to make personal projects together. But also, Reka is repped at Pretty Bird as a commercial director, and so a lot of the earlier union commercial work that I did as a cinematographer was through her and those, those Pretty Bird projects. And yeah, we just built this really organic sort of almost to the point of like telekinesis collaboration where we barely needed to communicate, and especially when we're on set, just have this sort of built-in um, workflow and partnership.
Nice. Something we've been asking each guest so far, each DP guest, is
Mhm.
if you could only shoot on one lens for every
Mm,
project going forward, format
yeah.
agnostic, is there any specific lens? Could be a set, but
Hmm.
more specifically, like focal length that you would
Yeah,
choose, your desert island.
ooh, that's a good question. Um, I would probably pick, I would probably pick one of the medium to wide, like 40 mil, or maybe it's a 45 millimeter Hawk V-Lite 1.3. Um, I love the V-Lights, specifically the 1.3 times squeeze, because again, just going back to this anamorphic theme, they have such a beautiful, subtle anamorphic look without being too without calling too much attention to it. And I just love what it does to skin and faces, um, and you can come away with like a 1.8, I think 1.85 image natively. And I've used those lenses a lot shooting 3 perf 35, and that's like probably my favorite look. Also just anything. This isn't a lens, but I've been shooting a lot of 2 perf 35 lately, and I think for me that's just like the perfect format for just about anything because of the way the grain is like really felt. I love the tactile texture of that. Um, and you still have like uh, enough resolution and detail where it feels premium. So
Mhm.
sometimes with the three perf and 4 perf 35, it almost looks like not digital. It does, I wouldn't say that, but it's almost too clean for me. So, but yeah, I love the Hawk V lights. Those are probably some of my favorite lenses. I also shoot with K35s a lot. Um, DD was, or no, 99 WiPo was shot on K35s. Um, Cook Pancros I use quite a bit. Not a very kind of a non-committal answer to your question there. Too many favorites. What about you guys?
It's all good.
What about us? I always say the 29 millimeter Summilux.
Okay, nice.
But the truth is that I said that the first day. I keep saying the same thing just to feel committed. But
Yeah.
Mm,
it depends on the on the day.
yeah,
Depends on the
yeah,
project. Depends on many things. The B lights are gorgeous lenses. I just
yeah.
shot a movie with the Hawk MHXs, and those
I
are
haven't
one of the
used
most.
those.
Those are so pretty. So I don't know. There are many
Yeah,
lenses. I mean, depending on the day, depending.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I
Mine were
get,
always the K35s. I love
yeah.
the K35s.
They're pretty
Yeah.
great. Pretty hard to beat.
Yeah.
You
Again,
guys,
if
could I
you
just
cropping it for a widescreen or anything, yeah.
yeah.
So Sam, being you a man of many talents as you are, if you were offered the same movie and you could choose between directing it, shooting it, or editing it, which one will you shoot? Will you choose?
That's a good question, but I'm gonna kind of cop out because it really truly would depend on exactly what the movie is. Um, I I mean, it would depend on what the movie is and who my collaborators were gonna be if I was gonna, just DP it.
Mhm.
I have a handful of friends, collaborators, and then lots of other filmmakers that I've never worked with before, but who I've, admired their work for years and would love to meet. And if the if the chemistry is there, of course, work with even as a DP or an editor. I don't really I don't really edit projects that I'm not also producing and directing
Hmm.
most of the time. So it's really more between DPing and directing, I think, for me. But yeah, it really would depend on the project. I also am, I've most of the films that I've directed, I've also shot, so I'll direct and DP. And I think I'm really interested in working with a cinematographer on my next project because for a bunch of reasons, but um, it can, of course, be a lot to direct and shoot your own stuff simultaneously. And but also, I love the idea of like melding minds with the DP whose work I really love and getting to see them. We talked about before we started the call how DPs how rarely we get to like first of all just talk and meet each other
Hmm.
and stuff, but you're never on set together. And so that would be like the one case where I could be on set with another DP is if I'm directing and I can hire someone else. So um, yeah, someday I'll do that and I'll probably come away from it a better director, but also a better DP.
Cool.
Nice. Is there mine's kind of just a silly question. Is there you have you worked all over the world? Is there any place in the world where you're like just dying to shoot something?
I'd love to go to Japan. That keeps coming up. I've had a couple projects where I like almost went to Japan to shoot and it didn't work out. But yeah, I've been everywhere with docs. I mean, one of the coolest things about shooting docs is you get to travel, but you get like the opposite of the stanchion tourist, the cliche tourist tours of a place. You get to like, I mean, what other career path, what other industry, maybe journalists, um, but like to just sort of be accepted into a community or a family's home who are strangers up until that point, and a lot of times in a different part of the country, sometimes in a completely different part of the world, and then just get to sort of observe and live like them. That is so cool. And I don't travel very much for pleasure, for leisure, because like I enjoy so much traveling for work. Like I find that experience so much more fulfilling than like waiting in line at a museum or something like that. Of course, not to take anything away from that. There's a lot of incredible things to do out there and places to see. But for me personally, yeah, that's one of the blessings of documentary is, and also like traveling and shooting smaller projects and getting to work with local crews is really fun, especially in the U.S. Um, every small town has the nearest like mini film hub, and getting to connect with those technicians is always cool. And there are some great characters out there and people who bring a lot to your projects, and they really hustle too, I find. Um, so yeah,
Nice. Well, Sam, thank you very much for being with us. I have
thank you
I have to
guys.
say that Didi is one of my top five favorite movies last year. So
Oh,
congratulations
thank
on
you,
that. And
thank you.
again, thanks so much. And I hope we can be in touch in the future.
Likewise, guys, I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing future episodes too. Love what you guys are doing here.